Hello, welcome to In Harmony with Nature. I'm Peter Shacklock, and I'll be host of this episode. In the studio with me today is David Morantz, who's with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, I guess the federal government, and he's the Chief of Evaluation and Mitigation Division of the Habitat Management Branch. And he tells me today our topic's going to be trout, salmon, and silt. And I'm going to have to pass the show over to David so he can tell us how all these three things are connected. So Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Before we begin, I suppose that I should say that my topic today is really about a pollutant, and that pollutant is silt. We must begin by defining what silt is. And silt is basically particulates of soil and of rock that have been weathered and have find their way into the environment. As you can see in this first picture that I've got on the screen, unfortunately, in too many cases, an overabundance of this silt material finds its way into the aquatic environment. And I'd like to spend the time describing just what the effects are of this pollutant. Now, silt is just really one size fraction, one type of particle. It's also called suspended solids, suspended material, anything like that. But really, I'm going to use silt as a term to describe all of the particulates, everything from the tiniest little particles up to sand. Now, we can't really understand what silt does in the environment, I think, unless we appreciate the quality of the environment required by fish, by trout and by salmon. And for example, in this picture you can see that there is clear, cool water with good cover on the banks. The bottom material is readily seen. It's not covered by silt, by those particulates that I mentioned before. And that is the kind of environment required by both trout and by salmon. And we'll see in a little while a few more specifics of the habitat requirements of those fish. And we really certainly can't appreciate the impacts of silt, of particulate material, without understanding a little bit about the life cycle of trout and of salmon, so that we can see all along through that life cycle just what those habitat requirements are and what silt does to the various life stages of those fish. This, of course, being Atlantic salmon, and I'm going to use that species as an example of a life cycle that is extremely sensitive to the effects of silt, of siltation. Well, in the fall, roughly about this time of year, as a matter of fact, depending on water temperatures, adult salmon come back to our freshwater streams to spawn, and in some cases they will migrate many, many hundreds of, and if not thousands of kilometers to reach the streams in which they were hatched. Now, they will find very specific locations in those streams to spawn. The female will search for an area with appropriately sized gravel, and where she is able to sense that there is a flow-through of cool, clean, well-oxygenated water through that gravel, as you can see by the arrows. The water that flows through that gravel, it, of course, carries oxygen, and it carries oxygen to the eggs, which are deposited, approximately 10 to 15 centimeters, sometimes even a little bit deeper, under the gravel. She will then cover over those eggs in these pits, or sometimes called redds, and there they will lie for several months over winter, not dormant, because there is a great deal of life that develops within these eggs over time, over the winter period, unseen by anybody at all. In the spring, generally speaking in April, the eggs hatch and become these little creatures called sac fry or alevins. Now, these sac fry are again hidden from view, still underneath the gravel, depending still upon that flow of cool, clean, well-oxygenated water, which carries oxygen to these little living creatures and carries metabolic wastes away from their bodies. In that next 3 months or so, after they hatch, they depend entirely upon the yolk within that yolk sac that you can see for nourishment. They don't actively feed. They will sit very immobile almost, wriggling just a little bit within the confines of the gravel, absorbing that material, growing, and maturing. Now, after that 3 weeks or a month period is complete, after they have absorbed the yolk sac, the fish will then migrate up through the gravel, through those spaces between the rocks. At this point, probably no more than about, a centimeter or so long, and they will finally reach the surface of the gravel, where they will then emerge into the flowing water and take their active place in the stream. At this point, they must begin to feed actively, and they will start to feed on a host of different particles. As a matter of fact, they're voracious feeders and will pick out almost any type of particle that flows through in the stream, that flows by them. Particularly what they're after are small invertebrates, tiny little insects. As time goes on, as the summer wears on, these little fish will grow, and they will move into faster flowing parts of the stream where the delivery of food, where there's more food, it comes by them because of the faster flowing water in that area. Of course, they can do that because they are now equipped to withstand fast flowing water. The reason for that, of course, is that they have developed, of course, in size, and their fins are much larger, and they can swim very actively against the current, and for that matter, they can rest on the stream bottom, almost pinned there by currents, using particularly the fins at the front of their bodies. It's very important in all of these pictures that I've shown you so far to notice just how intimately tied these fish are to their environment, particularly to the substrate or to the gravel bottom in which they live. One other factor, of course, in all of this is that they must be feeding at the same time. And they will go actively searching for food, not only that drifts by, but food that is attached to rocks and vegetation. And again, these are all aquatic insects, aquatic invertebrates, or they will also, of course, feed on insects that fall in from the trees nearby and drift downstream. They don't rely on any magical sense to find their food. They rely exclusively on sight. And so you get an impression, of course, that clear water is critical, for without visibility in the water, they will not see their prey, and they will not be able to feed. Unfortunately, there are many things that go wrong within a stream to degrade the environment for these fish. As you can see, there are a number of things. There's increased temperatures for a variety of reasons, particularly when the streamside vegetation is removed. Water chemistry problems because of pollutants that are introduced into our streams and lakes. Destruction of streamside vegetation through forestry, through urban development. All of these things are critically important and damaging. But perhaps the most insidious, the most widespread problem facing fish, goes back to the topic today, of course, is sediment production or siltation. And of course I refer to the evil Mr. Silt.
Yeah.
Now, there's two different forms of silt in our streams and lakes. One of them is suspended silt. That which flows in the water is carried by the water. Generally speaking, this is the very fine particulate matter which is light enough to be carried readily by currents. In slower flowing areas, much of that can settle out, and the heavier particles, especially sand-sized particles, will settle out as well. As you can see here, in some cases, settling out to depths all the way up to many centimeters, sometimes a half a meter or so, to the point where you can literally sink in it. I guess I don't need to say that in this case, or in similar cases, the habitat for our fish, for our trout, for salmon, and any of the other species, is completely eliminated. Well, what are the effects on fish? Let's go back to our life cycle again, if we remember. Critically important, of course, are the spawning grounds where the eggs are deposited. Relatively speaking, there are few of these areas in a stream that really provide excellent habitat as spawning areas. If these are damaged, perhaps the entire production for a year can be lost. As the silt rains down on the eggs that are deposited in the gravel, there is no longer a flow-through of clean, cool water into the gravel, carrying that oxygen, and the eggs will suffocate. Similarly, the metabolic wastes that build up are not allowed to be flushed away, and those eggs can die from toxic materials that are produced within themselves. But there's more. Those sac fry, those little alevins that are living in the gravel, of course, still depend upon that flow-through of oxygen in the water. They will suffocate if the surface of the gravel is completely blocked by silt so that water cannot percolate through, or they will not be able to swim up through that silt, those hard-packed particles. They will not be able to swim up to take their place in the stream, and they will starve to death. They will not be able to see their food because, of course, as you can see in the case like this, the water is so dirty, so cloudy, that it would be impossible to see any prey at all. The invertebrates that they depend upon for food suffer similarly. Their eggs are abraded like as if the particles in the water were like flowing sandpaper. The body tissues are abraded in the same way. Their respiratory structures are clogged, and they are literally scoured off the rocks and swept downstream. In cases where the silt problem is severe, as in the past picture, we even end up with fish being completely cocooned in silt to the point where, of course, they suffocate and die. These are extreme cases, but they are not unheard of cases, and unfortunately, it's all too common a problem throughout the Maritimes. Well, where does this problem all come from? Why do we have silt problems? Why are our streams, in many cases, not clear and clean and pristine? Well, I think we can probably trace the problem all the way back to the invention of heavy equipment, perhaps that first bulldozer. Many, many decades ago, the people that lived here would use shovels to do any work in or near streams, and of course there were small amounts of silt, but those are easily tolerated in our streams. The dilution factor is enormous when you consider a few shovelfuls of dirt. But a single bulldozer can accomplish more to scrape away the earth and expose the soil. They can do more in the space of an hour than probably somebody with a shovel could do in a year. And so you can see the amount of material that has been exposed, open to the elements, is absolutely enormous throughout all of our watersheds in Nova Scotia and anywhere else, of course, where these sorts of activities take place. And this is an example, a very common example, of heavy equipment being used in streams for a variety of reasons. Flood control, channelization for whatever reason. In some cases, individuals just don't seem to like having their streams in their backyards, and they figure that if they move the stream, they could perhaps utilize that land for something else. In the process of moving the stream, not only do, of course, they completely obliterate the habitat that exists there, but they release tremendous amounts of silt downstream, as you can see in this case. Or here, where logging equipment is occasionally used right within a stream, simply because that stream at the bottom of the ravine is the hardest spot in the area and the area least likely for the skidder to get stuck in. And so we have too often seen situations like this. The churning of the wheels, or in the case of tracked vehicles, the tracks, of course, releases, again, enormous amounts of sediment. Again, all too often, on steep slopes, on hillsides, where people want to traverse a stream, they will unfortunately sometimes travel down one side of a slope and travel right back up. The ruts that their machinery makes end up being flowing rivers of mud after every rainfall or after the snow melt. But these things are not confined to the countryside, to logging areas, to road construction areas. Right here in our cities, in urban development areas, as you can see right here. In many cases, subdivisions are created where enormous areas are opened up. The trees are leveled. The whole area is grubbed. That is, the trees, the vegetation is completely removed, and the soil is exposed to the elements. And you can see exactly what the results are. Again, an enormous amount of silt that ends up in our streams and lakes. Another example, just giving an idea of the wide-scale areas that are disturbed all at the same time. It's very, very difficult to control that amount of silt all at once. But we don't have to look at wide-scale areas of urban development to see problems related to silt and to erosion. An individual house, an individual lot in which the soil is exposed. You can see after a rainfall that material is carried down into the storm sewer, and of course most storm sewers end up in a watercourse, in a lake, or in the sea. Doesn't matter where it ends up, the silt ends up causing the same sorts of problems. The organisms that they affect might be different, the fish, the shellfish might be different, but the impacts are the same. There's road construction within urban development sites, of course, too. And here the roads will erode if they're not stabilized. The ditches will erode. Again, and I know that I'm repeating myself, but the problem is so common to all of these types of activities that you can see that silt is carried from all of these exposed surfaces to a downstream area. Ditches, a very common thing along our roads, of course, and if not properly stabilized, the amount of water flowing through these will create ruts and carry tons and tons of material to the stream, usually at the bottom of the slope. And in this case, this was a relocation of a stream for an industrial park development. And you can see what the end result is. Again, not only is the habitat just completely lost for the short term, but the silt that is released will end up damaging downstream areas for many, many years to come. We can't overlook one very important detail, and that is the enormous erosive power of rainfall. It's been calculated that the terminal velocity, that is the velocity of a raindrop when it hits the ground, is approximately 25 feet per second. Now I know it's just a little raindrop, but if you think about the enormous amount of water that falls, the erosive power of that drop falling at 25 feet per second will in fact cause a mini explosion, releasing silt particles which can then be carried away by the flowing water. Well, here's a perfect example of what happens if soil is left exposed to the elements. You can see each little pillar that remains is covered by a little tiny pebble. Those pebbles, that cover, protects the soil underneath it from erosion. If we remove the cover, if we remove the vegetation, the stones, the pebbles, then the soil underneath it is exposed to that 25 feet per second, and you can see the results. It ends up flowing away from the area and ultimately to a stream or a lake. But there are things that can be done. There are, as a matter of fact, many things that can be done inexpensively and with just a little bit of forethought in the design and planning phase to protect our streams and to prevent this erosion from taking place. We have to remember that erosion and sedimentation of our streams is not only detrimental to fish, but erosion creates enormous loss of soil for our farmers. It creates havoc with respect to drinking water, and it is a pollutant that we should not take lightly. It can clog culverts, it can damage structures within streams. So the problems that we have seen can be, for the most part, cured or prevented by introducing just some of these methods, such as introducing vegetative cover, mulches, filters, by putting in filter basins. Maybe we can just take a look at a few of these things as examples of what can be done. This is called EnviroFence. It's a filter fabric, a special fabric that permits water to flow through but traps the silt behind it. In a wide area on land where we expect sheet runoff, that is, a runoff not from a point source but from a wide area, the water is allowed to flow through, but as you can see, it does a fairly effective job in keeping the silt behind it. Or sediment traps, and this is in an urban development area. A trap that allows the water to flow in, the silt then settles out, and the relatively clean water is allowed to flow through the gravel berm. This is a case of a sediment trap which unfortunately is not terribly effective. There are right ways and wrong ways of designing and constructing all of these things. Here, this is probably, in fact, not even a help but a hindrance, simply because as you can see, the sediment trap itself is completely unstable and itself contributes to the silt problem. Or a ditch. A ditch like this with gravel berms, and this can be properly designed and placed straw bales, for instance, that are keyed into the banks. But whatever the type of material that is used, you see what happens. The flowing water is impeded by those berms, the silt falls out of suspension, and then relatively clear water passes over or through those gravel berms. And as long as those berms and those ditches are maintained, that is, that the material is removed periodically and deposited away from a watercourse, then the water that ends up downstream is relatively clean and harmless to fisheries resources below. Another case of a simple situation, a ditch, which has been allowed to be diverted into a forested area so that the material being carried along its length then filters out through that litter, the vegetative mat on the forest floor, which does an extremely effective job of removing those soil particles. And again, the result is the same, that the water that ends up in our stream at the bottom of the ravine somewhere is reasonably clean and harmless. In the case of streams that must be temporarily diverted, for instance, for the installation of a bridge or the installation of a culvert, it is a very simple matter to put down plastic, very simple, inexpensive plastic, in the temporary diversion channel. Water flowing over that, of course, does not erode anything. And as soon as the temporary channel is no longer needed, the plastic is removed and, in fact, can be reused in another location. Again, no erosion, no sedimentation. But here is a cofferdam. A cofferdam is simply a barrier to isolate the work area on the side of the stream, in this case, from the flowing water. And you can see just how effective it can be to protect the clean flowing area from silt. Another case in a lake. Same idea, same principle, and an extremely effective measure. In this case, these booms just have weighted down plastic to the bottom of the lake. This is in a shallow zone, of course, so that the silt is confined to this one area.
It's very effective. It
is very effective. Yeah. And hydro-seeding, perhaps one of the most useful tools that we have. Vegetation of any sort placed on an exposed slope will, of course, protect from those raindrops that I mentioned earlier, protect from erosion. And this is the result. An area that does not erode, and certainly does not erode readily. Well, what is the end result? The end result is, if we take care, we have a stream with clean gravel, we have a stream with fish of a variety of type. I've been talking about salmon in particular and trout. These, of course, because they are so important recreationally and commercially in the Maritimes. But we have to remember that silt is so widespread that it takes all of us to recognize that it is a pollutant and must be controlled. It is a cumulative pollutant. That is, if we put a certain amount into our streams through erosion, it's going to stay there for a very, very long time. What the objective is of our department, and of course interested in and concerned people everywhere, is the protection of situations like this, of streams that look like this, because it's important not only for those who want to fish our trout and our salmon, but for those who want to take a walk in a forest to see a pristine-looking stream, to see an area that has not been polluted by silt. The ultimate goal, of course, as far as we're concerned, is the protection of these fish for ourselves and for future generations. That's the story of silt. Unfortunately, it is too common a problem, but I suppose on an optimistic note, and to end, there have been many, many hurdles that we have managed to jump over, and there has been tremendous progress within various types of industries, from road construction to urban development areas, to agriculture, to forestry. Everybody seems to recognize that this is a problem, and there are steps that are being taken to rectify that problem.
Is there any legislation that's in force right now for?
Yes, the Fisheries Act particularly specifies that no one shall alter, disrupt, or destroy fish habitat, and of course silt will do all those three things. The penalties can be fairly severe, and yes, the legislation is fairly clear in the Fisheries Act against damaging fish habitats in any way.
Okay, pardon me. Thank you so much, Dave, or David. It's been a pleasure to listen to you today. Very expansive talk on silt and the effect on the fishing and or the fish, I should say, and the habitat. And I guess it's mainly our development that's causing this problem, and we should take a little bit closer look at every individual person. You showed an individual house is causing a problem downstream. So I think everyone should consider looking at their silt. Evil Mr. Silt.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Thank you so much. Good evening from In Harmony with Nature.